The Robert Eggers 2024 released horror gothic film that is Nosferatu is a chilling and dreamlike reimagining of F.W. Murnau's 1922 silent horror classic masterpiece film. And this version just isn't a vampire film, but it's a more kind of a tragic love story, a spiritual allegory, and a meditation on a very decay, longing, and sacrifice. We see at the start of the film begins not with kind of action we would assume, but with very stillness, and fog just rolls through the port city of Bremen, Germany, where we see the camera just glides past crumbling rooftops, fish markets, and narrow alleys, all built in a very blue, grey, light kind of tone. It's a dawn actually, but the town seems asleep or in mourning. We meet the character of Ellen Hunter, which is played by Lily-Rose Depp, standing barefoot in her garden. The plants are just brittle, the ground frost touch, and she gazes at a dead bird on the stone path. Without speaking or much of the having conversation, the film tells us that this is a world theatering between life and death. Her husband then comes into play. We see the character of the Thomas Hutter, which is played by actor Nicholas Hoult, very cheerful and oblivious, and appears behind her every time, just trying to act as a supportive husband and supporting her wife throughout the situation. He laughs, playfully hugs her, talks about the business, and she forces a smile. The contrast between his optimism and sadness is just striking. As he eats breakfast, Ellen watches from the doorway, her face just veiled by shadow. The cinematography just lingers on small things, his spoon clinking, the dust in sunlight, and a crack in the window. All these textures just foreshadow the decay that will unfold. Then Thomas arrives at the real estate office of Knock, which is played by Willem Dafoe, his employer actually. So Knock is just unsettling from the start of the movie. We see that his eyes being too wide open, fingers just twitching, and we see that his desk is covered in manuscript and kind of old texture, animal bones, and old maps. Knock informed Thomas that an aristocrat from Transylvania, that is Count Orlok, wishes to purchase a property in Bremen, and he opens a letter written in an ancient hand filled with archaic symbols that a new shadow just seeks an old home, and it reads. So now Knock insists Thomas be the one to travel east and handle the deal, whatever the situation is going on. Thomas at the first time of point, he's just hesitant to do so, as Transylvania is far dangerous and unknown to him. But Knock's charisma is intense and almost kind of hypnotic. So as Thomas leaves, Knock begins mumbling to himself in an unknown tongue. The room just darkens and he grins wide, showing teeth far too sharp. We see that night Ellen wakes screaming, and she had a nightmare back then. That is black horses, a forest of eyes, a man without a face. Kind of weird nightmare she's having right now, and kind of hinting towards the villain of the movie. So Thomas confronts her, brushing it off. She begs him not to go. He promises that he'll be back soon. The camera pans to their bedroom mirror, where Ellen's reflection is just delayed by a heartbeat, a subtle foreshadowing. She gives him a locket with her portrait, and to remind you of warmth, she whispers as Thomas departs. Ellen watches from the window, and a raven lands on the window sill, staring straight at her, and she just shudders right at the point of the time. Now Thomas just travels through his journey to Transylvania. He moves from train to carriage. Each transition just becomes more kind of eerie and unknowingly suspecting. The people become quieter, the landscape more twisted, and snow now falls in sheets. He passes into ruined churches and men carrying coffins around him, children crying in doorways, and all this metaphorical thing just hinting something dark is going to happen with him, or something unexpected is going to happen. In one village, he tries to ask for direction to Orlok's castle, but the innkeeper slams the door, and other whispers of the deathless one. Eventually, a black carriage arrives at midnight. The driver wears no face, just shadow beneath a hood. The horses just snort smoke. The ride through the forest is actually nightmarish, and twisted trees, branches like fingers, wolves howling in the dark, making the atmosphere kind of very tense. So now Eggers makes time feel just elastic, and moment stretches unnaturally. We see the castle Orlok is less a building than a wound in the landscape actually. We see it's perched on a cliff, and it leans, it crumbles. There are no birds and no kind of action of no sign of any life altogether. The door opens by itself. Thomas enters, falling out. At the top of the staircase stands the Count Orlok. So Count Orlok is played by Bill Skarsgård. So he's actually our Pennywise here. The actor who played the Pennywise in the It movie. So this is the same actor who is playing Count Orlok here. He's tall, unblinking, and skin like parchment, just kind of a horrifying figure in finding in front of Thomas, and teeth exposed, even not speaking. The dinner is silent actually. Orlok stares at Thomas, and the eyes are never blinking actually. He touches the locket Ellen gave him and visibly trembles that she and is rare. So this is what he just murmurs and he says actually. Thomas laughs nervously. Orlok smiles with hunger. The next morning we see that Thomas finds two small punctures on his neck. He assumes it as a kind of insect by just neglecting the deepness of this thing because it may be due to the castle Orlok. And we see in the night of the terror actually, because each night just become more and more surreal due to these experiences and all the things that are just happening. Orlok speaks in riddles actually. We see that shadows move even when the source is still, and rats are everywhere. I mean literally everywhere. They are omnipresent in this movie, to be precise. Thomas begins to dream of Ellen, a pale and floating in a black sea. He wanders the halls only to find Orlok scaling the walls and hanging upside down just like a bat. One night we see that he opens a coffin and sees Orlok sleeping in just dirt. Now Thomas tries to escape, but the castle shifts. Staircases vanish and door locks. He is a prisoner. Eventually Orlok departs from Bremen, traveling in a wagon filled with coffins. Thomas, weak and just delirious, collapses. Now we see that back in Bremen, Ellen is falling apart. She just sees Orlok in every dream, and every dream just turning into nightmare, and she just frightened by all this incident that is happening with her lately. She draws symbol in chalk and speaks to the moon. Her friend Lucy visits, frightened by Ellen's condition. The town doctor prescribes rest, but Ellen knows that it's not illness, it's a shadow, it's something more than a disease. We see the merchant ship Demeter carries Orlok and his coffins to Bremen. The crew soon just starts dying. The first mate jumped overboard, the second is found bloodless, and the captain's log becomes increasingly erratic. He speaks of a form made up of mist and a presence that cannot be just named. Eventually the ships arrive with no living crew, and the captain's body is tied to the wheel. The townspeople gather in horror as the cargo is unloaded and rats pour from the ship into the city. We see next scene that Bremen just descend into the madness. People actually grow pale, collapses in the streets, and children wail, and priests conduct mass funerals. The mayor orders lockdown on a heavy scale. Ellen walks through it all untouched, as if on another plane. She sees Orlok watching her from her ruined houses across the square. Every night he stands there is silent and unmoving things. Thomas, now finally rescued and returned home, is just horrified by all the things. He confronts the city leader, but they dismiss his talk of vampires. Only Ellen believes him. Now Knock, which is fully under Orlok's thrall, just escapes asylum confinement, and he runs through the city like a feral animal, shooting praises to the Lord of Rot. He claims the plague is just salvation, and he's hunted down but never caught. His presence is constant reminder that the reason he's just going to be is losing to darkness actually. We see now Ellen finds the books in Knock's quarter that is detailing of a vampire lore. Here we learn more things about a vampire and their behavior and all the things related to that. She learns the only way to destroy the Nosferatu is for a woman of pure heart to willingly offer herself, keeping him distracted until the sunrise, and she just closes the book. Her expression is just firm, and she just kind of still by reading this all things, because that is just running in her mind that she has to offer herself to the demon himself, that is Orlok. She knows that what must be done. Thomas begs her to run away, but she says it won't matter where he hide, he will find me, and that night she prepares. Ellen lights candles. She puts on a white gown. She places flower in her hair and opens the window. She sits by the bed. We see she is just calm and soothing. Thomas sleeps beside her. She brushes his hair with a finger, then kisses him one last time. That is live, and she whispers. She walks to the windows and stands there, and there are gusts of windows that are blowing in and around, and across the square we see the Orlok form just begins to stir. He vanishes from the window. The door just creaks, and the vampire itself, that Orlok, enters slow and silent. and Ellen does not even flinch one time. They face each other. He kneels before her, not in power but in reverence. As he feeds, her hand gently rests on his shoulder. It is both intimate and terrible. As blood leaves her, sunlight begins to rise, and Orlok hisses, backing away, but Ellen just calls him back. Now he just returns, and we see the sun climbs. Light touches his skin. His body just began to break down and deteriorate, a kind of shaggy feeling we get there because his skin is just dismantling. He gasps, more sorrowful than afraid, and his body just turns to ash, and Ellen just collapses. Thomas awakens to silence, and he finds Ellen lifeless in her chair, seems serene. He sobs, clinging to her. Outside, the rat vanishes, and we see the bell rings, this time not for death, but for peace. A child walks into the street unharmed, and the city is just for waking. We see in the aftermath of the movie that Ellen is buried on a hill under a lone tree. The townspeople speak of a sacrifice, though very few of them just understand what is the situation behind that. Now Thomas visits her grave daily, and Nock is captured again, no longer mad but catatonic, and Orlok's house is just sealed and left to decay. And the last image, his shadow flickers once more, then fade away. If we ask about particularly the ending of this movie, I think Ellen's self-sacrifice is not just noble, but it's cosmic at all levels, because she offers love in the face of monstrosity and light in the face of endless night. As Orlok is not simple a villain, he's a metaphor for longing, decay, and the loneliness of immortality. And Eagers paint him as a tragic figure, doomed to consume what he loves, and his destruction is not a victory but a sad release. I think if we deep dive into the interpretation of the ending, first one that just stand out is the Ellen as the light in the shadow, actually, because she represents the soul, the fragile but radiant. She is emotionally attuned from the beginning, sensing the decay that others ignore, and her empathy, visions, and willingness to confront darkness just make her not only the moral core of the history but its spiritual weapon as well. Because others just runs or just dismisses evil, but she faces it, and she is willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of goodness. And we see that unlike typical vampire movies, Orlok is less seducer and more suffering creature on the other end, and a relic from a dying world driven not only by bloodlust but by a lonely and obsessive desire that Eagers paint him as more than a monster, and he is a metaphor for death, for longing that can never be just fulfilled. He is terrifying, yes, at more point of the time, but also tragic at the same point. We see the town is just devoured by Daniel, because the town of Bremen represents the larger world, the larger picture, and its leader dismisses Thomas' warning and rationalize the rising death toll and ignore the spiritual decay. Their arrogance and need for control allow the plague in bracket, that is Orlok, to spread. The shadow and the feminine thing in this movie that just stands out, because Orlok is a pure shadow and a Jungian archetype of the repressed, the hidden, and in contrast we see that Ellen is light, the enigma, the divine feminine characteristics. Her sacrifice is the union of the opposites, not to be possessed or conquered, but to just neutralize chaos through the acceptance and the grace that might just needed for her character to live long. There is kind of a gothic and religious interpretation of the movie, because it just deep dive into many of the religious symbolism, including the crucifixes, candlelight. Then there are many more of the sacred texts we see throughout the film, and but the director just doesn't present a kind of a didactic Christianity, rather a very mystical spiritualism on the way. And Ellen's death is actually a resurrection moment for Bremen. She is buried on a hill and just surrounded by wildflowers, suggesting a rebirth. And her sacrifices redeems not only her husband and the town, but the very idea that love, even in horror, can be a redemptive force, and it's the thing that can change many of the things. I think the movie was brilliant, and even considering it as a kind of a remake, but the first film was made in 1922, that is nearly 100 more than 100 years back. So if you are comparing this film to that film, of course this film stands out, especially in case of cinematography. I think this film really shines out, because the set design, the costume, and everything, the environment, the so-called castles, home, and the city of Bremen, Germany, is just shown beautifully. And even the character who portrayed their roles, such as Lily-Rose Depp and Bill, they just brought the, what you can say, life to the character. They just played it delightfully. Especially the character of Ellen was played just brilliantly, and showcasing all type of emotion that a character need to express when they were doing certain scenes. You can just feel that. especially the sacrificing scene, and the Count Orlok, the vampire, is just as good as Alan's character, and the character is just written briefly, and not much of the context is given in related to Count Orlok, and he appears briefly in second part of the movie, nearly in the mid movie we can say that. And director Robert Eggers just delivers a very fantastic horror gothic film, I think. And even the Nicholas Hoult plays the navy husband with just charm and elegance that we have never thought. And but actually it's our own goblin, that is William Dafoe's performance as Knock, who just steals every scene whichever he's present in. His charisma, those wide eyes, those way of portraying emotions and delivering dialogue is very subtle and kind of a madman prophet, and he's terrifying and mesmerizing at the same time. We see the script is spare and elegant and drenched in very dread because dialogue are minimal in this scene, and much of the film just unfolds in very silence or whispered terror. And Eager doesn't explain, the director actually he implies the story unfolds like a medieval folktale or cursed scripture, and each act drawing us deeper into the doom. But I think at its core, Nosferatu is a story about longing, death, and sacrifice. It's not just about Orlok the monster. Actually, he's a symbol of eternal loneliness because he is alone, and a desire just corrupted into disruption. So I think it's a film of great metaphors. The vampires has grief, decay, and desire. It's as much about the human soul as it is about the supernatural. The music score is haunting. It's deliberately accurate wherever we need it to just elevate the performance of actor and elevate the overall scene. I think the music just plays a really very good role, and sound design is also has a brilliant effect. Silence becomes a weapon, and punctuated by the footstep we see of the actors' characters, and creaking wood and all those typical horror elements just blends in this gothic film very brilliantly. So it's not a casual horror fans like us expecting a jump scare or blood-soaked action, but it's a kind of a high art and meditative, symbolic, religious kind of deeply disturbing film. So if you like this such breakdown, do like, share and subscribe Cinema Shadows for more. Thank you for watching.